This company's never been more profitable.
You mean hugely profitable?
I like it.
DavePorter.com presents The Profitable Cleaner, a podcast on commercial cleaning sales and entrepreneurship. The one podcast that's not afraid to discuss real sales strategies with real cleaning professionals that produce real profits and real results.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Profitable Cleaner podcast. I'm your host, James Harper. I'm very excited for today's show because we are going to talk about one of the most requested topics from you guys. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be joined by Colby Morris. Colby, what's up, brother? How you doing this morning?
And it is a great day to be alive. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, Colby, I just want to always start with simple introductions. For those that don't know who you are, give us just the 5,000 snapshot about who you are, what you do, and the story of Colby.
Absolutely. I'm currently in leadership development. It's kind of a passion of mine. Been teaching and coaching leadership development for years, but I got there by way of environmental services, which is fancy word for housekeeping in hospitals, right? That's where I kind of found that passion and started developing it, falling in love with it. And that's what I do now. And I'm also the new owner of Authority Clean, which is a startup commercial cleaning business.
Love it, man. I think it's awesome to see more people like you venture into the space, especially with a leadership background. I think it's the key component to any successful company, especially in commercial cleaning. And it's also one of the most overlooked components, I think, in any industry and all companies.
Exactly.
So when you talk, when I hear leadership development, and I think others too, it's a very general term. What does leadership development mean to you, Colby?
So there's a couple of different aspects to it, right? Part of that is developing the leaders underneath you, which means don't just let them be and expect them to get better. You have to be very intentional. And so part of that is being intentional with their development. What does that mean? Well, you have to know where their weaknesses are, for one, but you also have to build on their strengths. And so if you're working with your team and developing them intentionally for next steps, which usually tends to be like succession, right? If I have a supervisor leave, if I have a manager leave, I've already started developing someone that can step into that role. And so as leadership development goes, that's what I'm working on. I'm helping them start taking next steps if that's what they want to do. And that's a big part of it.
I love that, man. Talk to me. Let's backtrack like 20 years, right? 15 years, however many years it's been. We don't all, I always say this on the show, we don't all say, hey, let's get into commercial cleaning. But likewise, we all don't just like sign up and say, hey, I want to really focus a lot of my intention on leadership. We kind of like form and evolve into that. What made you so passionate about just like the leadership, lifestyle, community? And I see how much experience you have in this realm. Like, what brought you to this path?
Well, when I first started in the hospitals, what was amazing was when I first figured it out, I started reading a book by John Maxwell, Developing the Leader Within You. And I thought, wow, that has some merit to it. That sounds like it makes sense. So I started picking a couple people, started working on developing them as I was developing me, right? And the next thing I knew, things started changing. Like operations got better. I was like, wait a minute, this is crazy. You know, we were struggling in these areas for so long. Why are we suddenly doing so well? Well, it's because the leaders got better. And back then, and if anyone is listening, they know in the contract world, they can move you around, right? And so we moved every 9 months for 5 years. That's a lot of moving.
Totally.
And the one thing that was true at every single place I found out was that as the leaders got better, the operations got better. There's nothing that gets worse when your leaders get better. The more you develop them, the more they come into their own as a leader, the more they're leading their people, the more they're developing their people. And that just made all the operations get better. And that aha moment was what really sent me on this journey of, okay, there's something about this leadership stuff that that really makes sense. So I'm going to dive into that and find out exactly what it is, because it's just making too much of an impact everywhere we go for it to just be this misnomer, right? The psychological talk, blah, blah, blah. It's not. It's real. It's practical, because when you develop those people, man, they make all the difference in the world in your operations.
So talk to me. I love that, man. It's not a coincidence that your leadership skills improve, leaders within your company start leading, and then all of a sudden operations become smoother, companies more profitable, the whole 9 yards. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is going to lead to my second question. But question one is, you mentioned John Maxwell. You're like the second or third person on the show to mention John Maxwell, obviously a huge leadership guru in the space. Right. What did you start doing outside of just reading like John Maxwell and gaining more information? Like, what did you actually start implementing to actually, like, with you personally, to see those leadership skills actually come to fruition?
So one of the main things was I started listening to podcasts as well. You know, let's start filling this vessel full of all the leadership stuff I can find, because the fuller I am with it, the more that will come out. But what I figured out was it did no good, and it does no good for someone to just listen and read and not implement something. There's a whole lot of difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge, right? And so as we go out there and we have all this knowledge, if you don't pick one or two things that you've learned and start actually working on them, you're just spinning your wheels. That knowledge does absolutely no good. So what I figured out was I'm going to start taking one or two things from everything I read, everything I listen, and I'm going to start working on that. Let's implement it. So for me, the first thing was communication. You know, really learning to communicate more. Leadership is not, well, I told them once they should do it because I'm the boss. That's not how it works. You know, you have to communicate and communicate and communicate. You know, Patrick Lencioni said, you know, if your people can't do a good impersonation of you when you're not around, you don't communicate enough, right? So you have to be out there a lot, communicate, always sharing the vision, always sharing the mission, you know, manage by walking around, talk to people, you know, develop relationships with people. And the more you do that, the more you'll get buy-in from your team, from your staff. And that's kind of where everything grows. John Maxwell said that leadership is influence. And I didn't really understand that at first, right? What do you mean it's influence? I told them to do the job. Why didn't they do it? So you have to break down the influence. Why does someone decide to allow us to influence them? How do they pick us to influence their life? Well, they don't if you don't have some sort of relationship with them, right? If I don't have that relationship, they have no reason to listen. They don't trust me. They don't know me. They don't know if I have integrity or not. I'm just the guy that's coming in barking orders. So as I develop that relationship, they now psychologically allow permission for me to influence them and have influence on what they do. And by doing that and communicating, I grow that relationship. Now I can lead them. That's kind of that beginner step.
I think that's really well said. And I think there's a huge difference that you just outlined between like directing someone to do it and influencing it. I hear a lot of commercial cleaning owners complain and blame their staff, the market, their clients. And although there's flaws with all of those areas, ultimately, anytime I hear like a business owner complain, I always kind of like start to judge them a little bit, because I'm like, what self-evaluation are you taking of you versus putting all the blame and excuses onto your staff or clients? You said something though that I want to pull more out of you here. You said there's a difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. I freaking love that, man. What is that? I think I know what it means, but like when you said it, like you said it with vengeance there, man. What's that mean to you? Head knowledge versus heart knowledge.
Yeah. So that's that Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which is we think we know a lot about something. And so we can we can spout off about it, but we don't actually have the knowledge to do it. So I could read all day about how to fix my engine on an F-150, but if I don't ever go out there and actually try it, I have no practical knowledge. So the difference is if I go out there and I read these books and I listen to these podcasts, I have all this head knowledge. But until I start becoming a practitioner of that leadership, of those skills, of those abilities, of that emotional intelligence, it does me no good. It has to get down here inside you. It has to become heart knowledge where it just becomes part of who you are. Part of what you said was, you hear people who blame their staff and, well, it's this and it's that. Yes, accountability is part of leadership, but it's also in your relationship with them. So if you have constant communication with your leaders and your leaders are rounding with those teams, and of course it depends on your organizational structure, right? But the more you're communicating, the more you're staying in touch, the more they become accustomed to hearing from you, seeing you. They know you're around. They know the expectations. So the one time they screw up, how do you handle that? Right? And it's about accountability. Hey, we got a complaint last night that, 3 of the trash cans didn't get hit. Did something happen or did you just miss that? Kind of walk me through that and let them answer. That it could be any million reasons why we missed 3 trash cans, right? But if I just walk up and said, you missed 3 trash cans, I can't believe you did that. They stopped listening at the moment I said you, and they heard nothing else, right? But as I reinforce that relationship and I find out what happened, it changes the dialogue. It changes that relationship. They don't want to let me down. They want to be on the good side. They want to have this relationship with me. And that's leadership. It's not bossing, it's leadership. So I've taken that head knowledge and created heart knowledge because I truly want to know and understand why this person did something or didn't do something when it comes to holding people accountable.
Oh man, that's really well said. I think that resonates with me, and I'm sure people listening, that's going to resonate with them as well. I want to reference, so for those that don't know, check out Colby Morris on LinkedIn. We're going to put you in the show notes here. I just think you're such a great follow because you're very active on LinkedIn and you share a lot of great stuff. I want to reference 2 of your recent posts that I knew we were doing this show, but they just randomly popped up on my feed and I read. And actually, when I first started reading it, I didn't even realize it was from you. And then I was like, oh, awesome. I'm so glad this is from Colby because we're going to be talking today. I have to ask him about this. And it goes to what you were just saying. When one of your team members makes a mistake, how do you hold them accountable? And how do you kind of deal with that confrontation? You had a post, it was sometime either a few days ago or last week that said, like something along the lines like leaders, conflict isn't always a negative thing. And that kind of resonated with me because I always talk to our team like, hey, tough conversations with clients doesn't always mean it's bad. When you hear conflict isn't, or you wrote conflict isn't always a negative thing, and you were kind of talking to leaders. Talk to me a little bit more about that and explain that to the people listening.
Yeah, so that concept comes from Patrick Lencioni, and he's an organizational health expert. And the way we look at this is when it comes to leaders, we can all agree on where we need to go, right? So if you and I say, hey, we're going to go to Miami next week. Okay, that sounds great. We both know we're going to Miami. And I say, I think we should go up to South Carolina first, visit around there, and then go south and hit Miami. You're like, that makes no sense. We should just go straight through Louisiana, Georgia. Let's get to Miami as quick as possible, right? We can argue about how we're going to get to the destination, but as leaders, we both know where the destination is, right? So if you take that and that goofy story and you bring it into real context, right? As leaders, we have to decide at the very beginning where we're going. We're going to be the best commercial cleaner. We're going to be the best whatever. And then how are we going to get there? And we can have arguments and discussions about that. And that becomes healthy conflict because we're trying to get to the same destination. This is not about me versus you. This is, hey, I agree with you completely. Have we thought about going this route? Have we thought about doing this? Have we thought outside the box? I think we should have one person on every floor of this building. I think we should do team cleaning and run 3 people through the whole building and knock it out task by task. Which one's right? Hey, let's try it out. Let's see what's going on. We have this healthy conflict, but it's not against each other. It's against the mission, right? That's healthy conflict. When you can get to that point where I trust you because I have that relationship, you've allowed me to influence you. You can influence me. When we get to that point, conflict is healthy because we're headed in the same direction to the same destination. It's just a matter of how we're going to get there.
And
so
it almost sounds, oh man, I think that's really clear to me. And that's well said because you have an agreement in place and the agreement is the destination. Now there might be disagreement on the how to, but if the goal is the goal, then ultimately we can probably figure out the in-between. It reminds me of a story. So I'm by nature a hockey guy because we live in Colorado Avalanche, Stanley Cup champs last year. And our head coach, Jared Bednar, said something good. There was a big team conflict like on the bench. And they asked him about it. And they said, hey, are you worried that your star players got into a conflict on the bench? And he said, no, because the goal is a championship. It's not about ego. It's about winning. So I think it kind of for whatever reason, that story popped into my head. It's like they had the destination championship and there was a little bit of conflict in between, but it's not about ego. It's about winning. And ultimately they won because they were able to get through whatever problem that was. And if you're listening to this right now, you probably have a manager. You might have a partner in your business, right? And I would encourage everyone to ask yourself, are you clear on the destination? Like I'm asking myself that right now, like with my business partner and co-host who's typically on the show with me, Angel. I believe we're clear, but it's probably a reality check to always get more clear. So how often do you do these self-analyzations and maybe leadership checks with yourself or with your team, Colby?
As often as we need to, because what's important changes so frequently. I would really recommend everyone read The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And there's a follow-up book that's very similar. It's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by the same author, Patrick Lencioni. And he basically says, there's some agreements that we have to have, right? And if we can align on that as a team, yes, we can have healthy conflict, right? But there's some questions that we have to answer to get there, right? And one of those is what's important right now. Okay. Well, what is important? Is it growing revenue? Is it building the team? Is it we have to run leaner operations? All that can change as far as what's important quarterly, monthly, just as we're being proactive and watching our business, that can change. And so when that happens, we meet again as a leadership team and say, okay, here's what's important now. Let's reevaluate. How are we going to get there? What are you going to do to get there? How are we going to hold each other accountable? How are we going to know when we're successful? And you go through these questions and really align the leadership at the top so that after there's complete alignment, you go out and there's no question. Everyone's on the same mindset. And when we go out and we're communicating and over communicating, it's the same message, right? And so if we need to meet monthly, if we need to meet quarterly, as things change, we need to make sure that we're being proactive and jumping on that.
Bingo, man, because I'm telling you what you just said is exactly what we see on this show. We're in this unique driver's seat. We get to speak to awesome people like you, Colby, all the time. We get to speak to owner operators doing $250,000 in revenue to doing $50 million in annual revenue. And I can tell you, take the revenue out of it, but the winning teams that we see, it's like they have this component of leadership and clarity, and they're in lockstep with each other. And I think that's exactly what you kind of just hit on. You're just kind of reinforcing what I think organically comes up on our show. So again, kind of talking to you guys, the listener, ask yourself, what are you doing as a leader today amongst your team to bring that clarity, bring that camaraderie? Colby, the next bit of the show, probably for the next 10 minutes, I want to talk about your second LinkedIn post, and then I'm going to ask you maybe a few tough questions here. But going to that LinkedIn post, the second LinkedIn post that I saw, which I also liked, which this time I knew was from you. You talked about don't assume anything when it comes to leadership. I'm guilty of assuming. I'm sure a lot of people listening are. What do you mean by don't assume anything when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that as leaders we're guilty of just assuming at times, right? We assume that everybody knows that we want to be the best. That we assume everybody knows what the KPIs are. Assume everybody knows what the goals are. We assume they heard about the changes that we made on this day about this process. Those assumptions are what will kill you. And again, over communicate. No one's ever left a job because their boss over communicated, right? So that's one of those things is we can't assume anything. We can't even assume that our leaders are developing. Like we have to take that on ourselves as a leader and say, okay, this month, tell me what you learned leadership wise. What did you read? What did you listen to? What's changed? What did you actually implement? Not just what you heard. Tell me how that's going, and be very intentional about it. Don't assume that they're just doing it. And I will say this, as the leader, you need to be adamant that your team is growing as leaders. And that's something you need to check in consistently, because if you're not, you're making this assumption that's going to eventually come back and really hurt your business.
Man, you just threw cold water on my face, because I have to hold myself accountable here on the assumption part. So I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm going to start with a story, okay, which will lead to my question. So we have 4 core values at our company, Day Porter. The first one's extreme ownership. Second one is continual learning, what you were just talking about. Third one is attention to physical and mental health. And then the fourth one is genuine care and commitment. And my business partner and I really try to live by these. We talk about them a lot, or we assumed we were talking about it a lot. We have a nice design for new employees that come in and they read about the core values. Like we've done trainings on our core values. Well, some of my best team members have been with us for 2.5 years, and we just recently welcomed on 3 new people. And I kind of called out the veteran team members and I said, hey, tell us about our core values. And man, they kind of knew them. And I thought I was bragging to my wife just a few weeks ago, because she manages a lot more people than I do. I'm like, hey, you need core values. My team lives by them, blah, 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 right? Look at us. And then I asked my team, and they knew, they kind of knew them. And I was embarrassed. I assumed that they knew our core values, and I assumed that they lived by them. So, which isn't a reflection on them, it's a reflection on me, and that's failed leadership. Which brings me to my question for you, Colby. Tell me a time that you have failed as a leader and what you learned from it.
Man. Well, first, let me address something you just said. When your realization of that goes back to your first key value, which is extreme ownership, right? The failure of their recognition of that is taking extreme ownership. That's on me. I haven't communicated it, that kind of thing. So kudos to you to going back to your core values.
Yeah, thank you.
And the failure of noticing the core values. So probably one of my first accounts in the hospitals as a leader, it was really before I got into leadership. And I really thought at that young age that I knew everything about being a boss. I was very much a hard-nosed stickler for details, for everything. And there was no grace. There was no, why is this dusty? What happened? Did you miss it? It was, this is dusty and you're going to fix it. And that ultimately, when I had to really face it was when I had people start leaving and I didn't understand why. And finally, this one floor tech who had the guts to say something said, Colby, I just don't like working for you. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a great guy. He said, no, you're not. You're really mean. You're very strict. You know, do you even know if I have kids? Do you know anything about me? And I just sat there while crickets were in the background, you know. I was like, ouch. Like, and he said, Colby, you're a decent boss, but you're a bad leader. And he turned and walked off. And I sat there and had to wrestle with that for, man, it still hits me. If someone said that today, I would cry, I think. But that was the start of it. You know, I realized that I had failed at leadership 101. You know, I was on boss 404, you know, and that means absolutely nothing to your team. They, you know, John Maxwell says nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care. That's true. And especially in today's workforce, they don't care. If you don't know me and you don't know about me, why am I going to listen to you? I have no relationship with you. There's no reason for it. And so I always come back to that. You know, you can be the person that gives orders. That just makes you the boss. It doesn't make you the leader.
Man, that is so well said. And I'm glad that tech spoke up in that moment, because look at how it helped you form as a leader, right? So
absolutely.
Colby, we're going to have to do version 2 of this, man, with my partner Angel on this podcast, because I think there's just so much. To keep this simple, I guess 2 last things for you quickly here. One, what advice would you give to a cleaning owner listening to this right now saying, I can improve my leadership skills? Where should they start? And then the second thing is, where can people find you, your company, if they want to connect with you? We'll link it all in the show notes, so don't worry about that. But the floor is yours, sir.
I would say first thing is start with the basics. Realize that leadership is about people. Ross Perot, who ran for president back in 1992.
Oh yeah.
I remember the Saturday Night Live skits about him. You know, he said you manage inventories, you know, you manage processes, right? But you lead people. And that's the main thing is remember that everything about leadership is about people, period. That's full stop. I would suggest that they get into some resources quickly. John Maxwell's probably the easiest one to get into. You can graduate to some others, but if you're new to it and it's the first time you're thinking about it, get you an audiobook or Kindle or hardback, paperback of some John Maxwell books, Developing the Leader Within You, Developing the Leaders Around You. Those 2 are great places to start. Obviously, there's a ton more, but if you're just getting started, I would suggest start with those 2. Get into some podcasts. There's a ton of leadership podcasts out there. I tend to reference them on my LinkedIn. So if there's ever any questions or if anybody has any or wants some suggestions, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn there. Again, I am on LinkedIn, Colby Morris, and I also own the Authority Clean page on LinkedIn. So they can connect with me there or on Twitter. I think it's Colby CM on Twitter. So.
Awesome, man. Colby, I appreciate it, brother. I think this time's been invaluable. I'm definitely going to have you back for a version 2 of this with Angel.
I'd love to.
Yeah, man, this has been great. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon, brother.
All right. Thank you, James.